This is the 40 Thrive Podcast, episode 15.
You're listening to the 40 Thrive Podcast, the show created for women 40 and beyond, ready to shake things up. Get exclusive access to expert advice, support, and strategies that will inspire, motivate, and give you the tools to not just survive, but thrive. And now, your host, Jackie McDougall.
This episode of the 40 Thrive Podcast is sponsored by Coconu. I first discovered this magical product when hosting the Self-Care Project back in November. I've got to give you a little TMI here, but since having a complete hysterectomy at 35, sex without lube can be awkward and uncomfortable. Yet almost every brand of lubrication I've tried left me stinging and burning. I told you it was TMI. Then Coconu arrived in my life. Their slogan is, have better sex naturally, and I'm here to vouch for it. Silky, gentle Coconu enhances sex in a totally natural way. Coconu's coconut oil-based formula is USDA-certified organic. Made from organic oils and coconut water, Coconu lets you follow your bliss wherever it takes you. Coconu, as natural as sex. Get 10% off your order at coconu.com. Use my promo code THRIVE at checkout. Okay, on today's episode, Nina Lorez Collins is here. Nina's the founder of an online forum for women over 40 called What Would Virginia Woolf Do? She's written a book by the same title and is interested in issues around female empowerment, sexuality, aging, health, and general well-being. She's a graduate of Barnard College, has a master's degree from Columbia in the field of narrative medicine, and has a long professional background in book publishing, both as a literary scout and then as an agent. She has 4 nearly grown children and lives in Brooklyn Heights. Nina shares the catalyst for creating her Facebook group, originally intended for about 20 of her closest friends, now well over 26,000 women strong. She also shares what she's learned from women over 40 and what the term 40 Thrive means to her. Nina, welcome to the 40 Thrive Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, I read your bio. We all know that your group is blowing up. It has blown up. There's over 26,000 women in there. You're clearly... your message is resonating, but can we go back a little bit and where your life was when you came up with this idea? Hey, I should start a Facebook group.
Sure. And I also really didn't ever think I was starting a Facebook group like this. I thought I was starting a community for 20 of my friends. I was 46. I had just turned 46 and my periods had been kind of irregular for the previous year and a half. But, every other month, and my gynecologist had reassured me it was normal, and I wasn't really thinking about, I don't know, what menopause meant or aging in particular, but I was approaching the empty nest. I think all my kids were gone except for one who was on her way. And I had recently remarried and was feeling a little, a little uncertain about what the next phase of my life was going to look like, and I suddenly stopped sleeping. I suddenly, was waking up at 4 a.m. every night. And it was very unusual for me. I'd always been a great sleeper. Mm-hmm. And I ran to Google trying to figure out what the fuck was going on and realized that, that insomnia and waking up at 4 a.m. was a classic perimenopausal symptom, along with 33 other symptoms that I had never seen before. And one of them was super funny. One was impending sense of doom. And I was like, what the fuck?
Wow, that's not daunting.
No, it's so funny. And so I posted on my regular Facebook page, which I always kind of enjoyed, and said, did you know that impending sense of doom is an actual documented symptom of perimenopause? And my girlfriends, my Facebook friends who were women, and I kind of giggled about this and had this little funny thread. And in that thread, we joked that maybe we should create a group where we could talk about kind of in self-deprecating but funny ways all the horrible things that are going on with our bodies about aging. And a couple weeks later, I found myself in a motel room. I was with my kids visiting my son who was in a hockey tournament. And I was feeling that kind of, if you're a middle-aged mom of teenagers, that feeling of being ignored and kind of old and flabby. And
I have no idea what you're talking about, Nina.
And I was like, you know what? I'm going to start that group. And I just created it. I was literally midnight in a motel room in Minneapolis, and I had never created a Facebook group. I just kind of figured out how to do it. And I called it What Would Virginia Woolf Do? Because that seemed super funny and dark to me, because most of my girlfriends are smart, funny feminists and big readers. And I'd been reading a lot of Virginia Woolf that year. I was in a graduate program at Columbia, and she killed herself in her 50s. It was not meant to be. And now I feel sometimes self-conscious because I'm not trying to make fun of suicide or make light of suicide. It was really just a joke about, should we all just throw in the towel?
Right.
Had I known it was going to become this and something that I'm trying to really turn into a business, I probably would have called it something else. But that's also the beauty of it is, one of the amazing things about this experience, which I say all the time, is just how unbelievably organic it's been. I've just never experienced anything like it. It's a little bit like the monster that took over my life. And I think, had I done it to create a business and, called it something like, I don't know, Aging Gracefully actually wouldn't have been a bad title, but whatever. Had I called it something intentional, I don't know if it would have happened the way it has.
Right. Well, I think that's the thing is, especially on Facebook and Facebook groups, and I have a 40 Thrive group, but people don't want to be sold to.
Yeah.
They want to be understood. They want to be heard and seen. And I think that's what people were really responding to, because it wasn't like, hey, come in this and then buy my book and listen to my podcast. And granted, you have the book and you have the podcast, but
later, but yes, you're right.
But they are kind of the next evolution of this brand, because obviously women over 40 are desperate for help.
Yeah, clearly.
What's been the most surprising, not necessarily about the growth and the fact that it's blown up, but what have you learned about women in our phase and age and stage of life that maybe you didn't know?
I think everyone would agree that the number one thing we've all learned from each other that so many of us didn't know about and hadn't ever heard articulated was just this really simple issue of vaginal atrophy, vaginal dryness, kind of vaginal pain, pain upon intercourse sometimes later in life, all of which is treatable and manageable and preventable. But it was something, it's really, the group is certainly not just medical. There are a lot of health conversations, but this one issue has been a kind of a revelation, I think, for a lot of us. So often when I meet wolfers in real life, like people will want to talk to me about their vaginas, which is kind of funny. So I think that on a very practical level is something we all learned, that as women get older, our bodies dry up a little bit. Vaginal discomfort is not uncommon. It's very treatable. For some reason, our doctors don't warn us about it. And so a lot of women suffer in silence and are embarrassed and think it's just them. And it's so not just them. On a million other levels, there have been so many things we've learned. How common sexless marriage is. And another thing that people really don't talk about, and I wish they were more open about it, but of course it's very hard for privacy issues, is all the difficulties our teenagers go through, like late teenagers into college, and how terrifying it is, drugs, depression, anxiety. It's a very hard thing to talk about because you have to protect the privacy of your kid. But at the same time, it's you need help, you need resources, you need to know how to deal with it. You're suffering yourself from so much fear and shame around it. So we've created a safe space for the most part where women can get some answers and get support.
Let's go back to that for a second. So I've never seen anywhere where women are so willing to share some of the most intimate details of their lives. And sometimes I wonder, do they realize that anything can be screen grabbed? Nothing's private, right? We teach our kids, nothing you put online is actually private. There's so many opportunities for people to, to share it.
Absolutely.
So what do you think it is that you provide that give people this? I'm sure they're very smart women. I've seen some whip smart women in your group talking about things that are way above me, but at the same time, talking about things that we're all going through in such a way that they feel totally safe.
Yeah. I think it's a combination of things. I do think, like any organization group, right, the kind of ethos or the vibe comes from the top. And I am someone who really believes in the power of telling our stories and being vulnerable to kind of reduce and eliminate shame. I think the feeling of the group and the way I want it to be is very genuine, and that comes across. And my own ability to be super vulnerable and honest has allowed other women to do it, which is amazing. And then I think also because of the way it started, and it was small and secret, and it was a lot of people I knew in the beginning, we all created this this feeling of a safe room. And so as it grew, that kind of radiated outward. It's a little tricky now that we're 26,000 women. Now, I mean, there was a long time where even when we were at like 8,000 women, I knew or had one degree of separation from pretty much everyone in the group. Now, of course, that's not the case. And we do occasionally, in some ways, I've suffered from it more than anyone. Like, I have to be a little bit more careful about my private details now. But we do have moments when women get burned. We have had incidents where people have screenshot, but I have to say we've been pretty good, even at this size, at figuring out who the person was and removing her. And what we usually do is we kind of publicly, we don't really handle it offline. We actually try and usually handle it in the group. Like we won't point a finger and say so and so told, but we will kind of in a thread say this is not acceptable. You're not allowed to do this. You are going to be removed. And whenever there has been a breach of confidentiality, we post a new slew of posts reminding everyone that the group is supposed to be like Vegas. What happens in the group stays in the group. As it continues to grow, and that becomes harder. It's one of the reasons we have a small subscription group now called Wolflandia, which is $75 a year. And I created it in large part because I missed having the small group and a place where I could be more vulnerable and honest. I have to be careful now in the large group, like if I'm talking about, my kids or my romantic partners. And I want to do it because I want the group to be what it was in the beginning. And I like sharing. And I like the kind of conversation it engenders when I share, but I do have to think, it's not like the old days when I would just kind of post everything I thought. I have to be a little bit more careful now.
Right. Especially when it comes to, you have 4 kids, and that's where I struggle too, because sometimes the things that we're going through are inspired by our children's behavior something they're going through. And so I want to touch upon that where you were talking about like, many of us have I have young teenagers, but in 5 years, it's a totally different story. Yeah. And so some of the things that they're going through, and sex and drugs and depression, I've seen it with friends of mine who are my age or maybe a little bit older. How are these women able to connect with each other without kind of exposing?
Yeah, it's hard. We do have an anonymous feature. So there are lots of times where women will write in anonymously and then people will comment and they'll say, like, if you want to speak to me, PM me. And so then I'm sure, I don't know who the anonymous people are, but I'm sure they reach out individually. I do know many, many, many friendships have been formed from the group. There are book clubs all over the country and women get together and travel together. So I think the anonymous feature is one way. And then I think also we have a lot of women in the group who don't know people in the group. I find it interesting. And one of our challenges as we try and grow this is that a lot of women really do see the group as like their secret place. So there are some members who join and then invite like their 80 best friends, but the majority of women join and don't tell anyone and don't invite anyone because they want it to be secret and safe. In the beginning, people used to write to me and say, the only person I couldn't bear to share this space with is, my ex-husband's new girlfriend. Can you never let her in? I actually had a list of people who I was not supposed to accept. And, it was kind of, but now we can't do that. Now it's like, It's just too big. The flip side of that is like the beauty of what we've created. And I do really think the vast majority of members feel it is that it is a sisterhood. So even if there's someone in there who you feel, might not really like you that much, the hope is that she'll respect the space so much that she will be respectful and, not cross a boundary. And, there are a couple, actually I can think of these 2 women who have been in from early days, and they apparently had a big fight between them in the context of their kids. And I don't know, wherever they live in the suburbs of, I think, DC. And they both separately wrote to me and said, I no longer feel safe in this space with so-and-so. And I was like, I'm super sorry, but you're actually both really good wolfers, and I can't kick either of you out. So you're going to have to figure it out.
You're going to have to work it out.
You're going to have to work it out. And they have.
It's like when you are out doing something that you're not proud of, and then you see somebody else and you're like, oh my God, they saw me doing it. And it's like, well, they were doing it too.
Exactly.
So you have 2 people in the group who need the same type of camaraderie and community. So maybe it can actually build a stronger relationship.
we all really learn from each other in the group when bad things happen. And, when people behave badly, when, sometimes we have threads where people feel like there's slightly racist comments or ageist, or, there are all sorts of ways we can offend each other. And sometimes things are really not okay and we remove people and we're mortified or, upset. And other times I say, like, this is an opportunity for us to grow. And, there's a motto in the group, assume goodness, which I don't know where I came up with that or where it grew from, but we've had it from the early days and I had to use it yesterday. And I really do feel it. Like, we're all struggling and doing the best we can. And the idea is that we're supposed to be here to help each other and, make each other laugh and, grow from the experience. So,
right. Well, it's so interesting because if you look around online, the last thing people are doing is assuming goodness when we're jumping at the chance to right every wrong that's ever been, said online.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to kind of like flip the script a little bit on that when you get into this group, because you're still online, you're still in that place where you're like ready to pounce, but at the same time, that's not allowed here. That's not the way we're going to,
that's right,
really approach things here.
And it does happen. Like, people will join the group and behave that way. And we've had a few women where I've just had to, actually, we've had women who've come back to me and said, thank you so much for not kicking me out when I behaved badly. Like, one thing people have to learn, sometimes they have to come into the group and like be quiet for a while and just hang out and see how we, what our tone is. And then they kind of get it and behave accordingly.
Right. So one of the things that I feel like women are getting is that support and the camaraderie. And when we were younger, maybe in your 20s or 30s, we had Mommy and Me, or we had different organizations for mothers and sometimes fathers of young kids. And then we get into our 40s and we have teenagers, or they're grown and flown. The community that you built online can provide what those groups used to provide.
Yeah.
Because I think we're so isolated and we're so lonely and we feel like we're going through this stuff alone, and we're not necessarily in the kindergarten class connecting with another mom or whatever it is that we're doing, or we're working full-time jobs and we're doing our thing. So I feel like this time in our lives can be extremely isolating. So how do you create that community in real life and not just online?
Two things for that. I mean, certainly, as I said before, women in the group have made a lot of friends from the group, and we do a lot of events. We wish we could do more. We do most of our events in New York, where I'm based, but we have some in LA, and we have a Wolfer book club. So we have a main group called What Would Virginia Woolf Do? And then we have like 32 subgroups. So there are regional groups and subject groups, all Wolfer X. So like Wolfer Money Matters, Wolfer Twin Cities, Wolfer Florida.
Right.
So in the local groups, women often organize get-togethers, which is great. For me, in some ways, I don't actually feel so isolated. I mean, I have a lot of really close friends I adore. I think the group almost serves a slightly different function. I often say, like, it's interesting when you're going through something in your own life. At this point, we're old enough. We kind of know which friends are going to say what and how that conversation is going to play out when you have a certain crisis. Like if someone's cheating on their husband, or worried about that novel she can't finish, or whatever, having a hypochondriac moment, or and when you go into the group, with your question, you get answers that are unexpected, and they also feel unbiased, and in a lot of ways they're more helpful, which really, really surprises me. I mean, I was never someone who thought I would look to an online community for support, but I think a lot of us feel this way, that we can go in the group and ask a question, and the answers can be just as helpful, if not more helpful than in real life, which is interesting. So it doesn't mean you don't want your real life friends, but
Right.
It's a different bonus. It's interesting.
That's such a great point, because sometimes you have those certain friends and one of them's always going to tell you that you smell like roses and you're amazing no matter what you're doing and how ugly the moment gets.
Yeah.
And then you have another one who'll call it like she sees it. But in the group, these people don't necessarily have those ties. They don't need to please you. They don't want
Right.
to,
The example of that is the famous "Am I an asshole?" thread. About a year and a half ago, I posted, I was married. I've since gotten divorced, but I was married to my second husband. And it was a short marriage, and it wasn't going particularly well. And we had a dog, my dog, from before we got married, and I wanted to get a second dog, and he didn't. And I really wanted one, and he really didn't want one. And I posted and said, I'm married, and I want a second dog. And like a lot of us, like I more than pay my fair share, and I do most of the work around the house anyway. So I'm wondering if I should just get one. Am I an asshole? I thought it was like a throwaway thread, like no one would really care, but it was incredibly engaged. And a lot of women were like, yeah, you're a total asshole. Why would you do that? If he doesn't want a dog, why would you get one? Other women, were more kind of seeing it a little bit my way. They were like, it's not really nice of him. He's not committing to you. He should, he'd love the dog anyway. Maybe you should just go ahead and do it. I ended up not getting the dog, and I ended up divorcing him. But it was an interesting thread. It was surprising, and it was good that people could be like, yeah, you're really, being a jerk.
Right. And and that's amazing, because your friends would probably be like, no, I totally get it. The kids are out of the house, and you should get that second,
it wouldn't have been as helpful, for sure.
Right. So let's talk about the book. So was the book always in your head, or was it kind of based on the success of the group?
The book was not in my head at all. In fact, I'd never written a book, and had been trying unsuccessfully, and still trying unsuccessfully for years, to write a memoir that's largely about my late mother, who was a very talented filmmaker and playwright. And so I'd been struggling with this literary memoir. And I started the group, and the group took off, and basically just started taking up all my time pretty much right away. Like I was really on there because I was the only moderator for the first year. Now we have a team of moderators, but so from pretty much 2 or 3 months in, I was like on my phone constantly, and my kids, my husband at the time thought I was crazy. And so I started to think about what I could do to justify all this time on Facebook. Should I be having some events? Would that bring in some money? What would make it feel not just like a really silly hobby, and like a little more legit? And I decided, I came from the world of book publishing. I was a literary agent and a scout for many years. And I thought, well, maybe I should write a book. It'd been, by the time I sold the book, the group had been in existence for a year, and it was full of really exciting, engaging, funny conversations. And it was clear to me what women wanted to talk about. And I suddenly had like a vision for, I could write like a funny kind of what to expect when you're expecting for menopause, was really the idea.
Right.
And I sat down and wrote the proposal. And unlike the torturous memoir I've been working on for years, it just ended up being a really easy and fun project. And I wrote the proposal, and I sold it. And then I wrote it quickly. I think I delivered it in like 9 months. And then it came out in April 18. It's called What Would Virginia Woolf Do? And Other Questions I Ask Myself as I Attempt to Age Without Apology. And it's kind of part memoir, part resource. Like it's divided up into kind of obvious chapters like sex, empty nest, work, money, kids, body, health. And then each chapter starts with kind of a funny anecdote from my own life, and then launches into advice from experts, my friends, some voices from wolfers, so all sorts of stories. It was fun. It was really fun to write.
And did you find that you were asking the wolfers for stories, or were you kind of pulling from stories that were already there? I'm just curious if there's a difference in the group when it comes to soliciting actual content versus natural conversation.
No, honestly, I really just wrote the book from my own knowledge. Like it was pretty straightforward. Like I thought, okay, I'm going to write a chapter about sex. Well, how do I feel about sex in midlife? And, what was my sexual history like, and where has it led me? And then I started talking about vibrators. And I guess where I pulled, like in the sex chapter, for example, I wanted to do a segment on anal sex, but I don't have anal sex myself. But a lot of my friends really do and really like it. So in that case, there's a writer named Toni Bentley who's written a really well-regarded book called Surrender. So I quoted her, and I quoted some friends. And so there were times when I might, or like say I was writing in the body section, I was writing about heart disease. I quoted some doctors, and then I might have remembered a story in the group where someone had talked about heart disease. And then I would just write to that woman directly and say, do you want to give me a quote about this? And then I would get her permission and quote her. But nothing was sourced it wasn't taken from the group. There was enough information in my own knowledge to write the book.
Right. So I feel like there's
I'd say it was inspired by the group, but not
inspired.
Yeah.
But I feel like there are so many people out there outside of your group and my group who kind of see women over 40 or over 50 as just this community. Like we're all the same because we've hit a certain age versus like, because when you talk about sex, I know women who are having more sex and better sex than ever in their, mid to late 50s. They're having a blast. There's no kids around to walk in. They're just like, it's this sexual awakening. And then other people who haven't had sex and are married or coupled and they haven't done it in years.
Yeah.
And so for us to kind of try to serve these women at this age and stage, but to expect that they're all the same is a huge disservice. So I love that you don't come from that. You don't come from like, we're this age and now this is how we live. Like we're all still unique, different people with all of our own experiences.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a good point you make. I mean, it's interesting. Like, where do we come together? The places where we come together, I think what I see in my group all the time is just, we've learned, I mean, I hate to use the word empowering, but it has been really empowering to realize how much kind of wisdom and strength we all have. That, I think, is something we have in common. We've lived a long time. We know a lot. We have a lot of experiences. We have a lot of resources. We really have a lot to offer each other. But no, our experiences are widely varying and we learn from each other.
And I think that when you have women from so many different backgrounds and with such different experiences, you're absolutely right. The common ground is we've lived a lot of years and we know some things.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, we need to respect ourselves and each other. But how do you kind of serve this group, understanding that, I mean, I struggle with this where it's like, I'm very much like, let's just balls to the wall. Let's make this happen. This is our time. My experience specifically, I have 3 kids, 12, 13, and 14. And so I'm out of those baby years, but I'm not necessarily like white knuckling the bed because I'm waiting for somebody to come home with the car yet.
Right.
So I'm in this real sweet spot, I feel like, in parenting because, and I'm not fooling myself that it's going to change and morph and become whatever it is. But I find myself to be more of that cheerleader type versus the one who's like, hey, this is my experience. I haven't had sex with my husband in 2 weeks or whatever it is. Like, So I love that you kind of come at it willing to give more of your vulnerability, more of your shit to the group. So that way it inspires them and encourages them to give it as well.
Yeah, I don't know. People ask me all the time why I'm comfortable doing that, or, I'm sure people think it's weird, but I just don't. I mean, I just feel like life is complicated and messy for all of us. And there are ways in which I'm really lucky and fortunate and ways in which I'm really not. And, ways I'm talented and ways I'm not. And I feel like that's true for everyone. And we're all better off if we acknowledge it instead of feeling inadequate all the time or ashamed or, worried or so. Yeah. So I'm really extremely comfortable just saying what my truth is, like, all the time. I really don't have any secrets, and that's fine with me.
Yeah, it's funny because I thought I was the same until I talked to you, and then I realized, wow, you're kind of guarded, about myself. I'm like, oh, I don't think I'm nearly as open as I thought I was.
That's really funny.
I feel like, maybe I'm strategically open. I give enough that people think, oh, she's open, but not so much, so.
I wonder all the time, like, what would I keep secret if I wanted to keep a secret? Like, I'm kind of like trying to, so it is somehow just the way we're wired. I think these things, like, I have many flaws. It's not like, but for whatever, that's just something that feels easy to me.
Yeah. I think when I get quiet or not as open is usually when it involves someone else.
Yes. Well, I have had to learn. I think when my kids were little, I was more open about my kids. So I have definitely gotten strategically careful about them. I do not tell their secrets anymore. I did sometimes when they were little, and it was really wrong.
Oh God, I was a mommy blogger. I told everything.
Oh yeah, it was not fair. So I've come to really, and same actually with I'm in a new lovely romantic relationship with someone, and I don't talk about, I'm really very careful about how I talk about him because I've now become somewhat of a public figure, more than I was 10 years ago. And it's just not fair. So in that sense, I'm more careful. I wouldn't, if I got chlamydia from my boyfriend, I probably wouldn't tell the group, and because I was not fair to him, whatever. But
maybe we should make it clear that you did not get chlamydia from your boyfriend, just in case anyone's, just in case he's listening.
Definitely did not.
Well, I'm the same way with I've been married for 16 years, and I am the same way with my husband. Like I don't talk about him a lot, even though he's most of my life, but I don't necessarily talk about his business. So I talk about marriage in general, just like parenting in general. I realized when I was blogging and doing all that, mom blogging stuff, that I got to a certain age where my kids got to a certain age where I realized these are no longer my stories. Mm-hmm. These are their stories, and they should have the right to tell them or not tell them.
Yep, I agree.
When it comes to my own, battles and health stuff and experiences and upbringing and all of those things, I feel like I'm wide open. But then when it comes to like the private details of those around me, I get like, oh, I have to be private,
And it's true. It's completely true. And in some ways it's too bad. I mean, I'm sure like you, like I have 4 kids, so I've seen a lot with my kids, and I feel like there's a lot that I could tell people that would actually be helpful and reassuring and interesting and funny. Like it's very good material, all that kids,
right? But
it's just off limits. So that's, yeah.
Well, I guess we have to do that in the old school way and just do it over drinks with girlfriends, right?
Exactly. So back to your question about, the difference between in real life, that's when your girlfriends in real life are great because you do want to talk about that stuff and you can with them.
Exactly. Real quick, I want to talk about your mom because you, Kathleen Collins, your mom was a trailblazer when I was doing a little research on you, and you kind of keep her legacy alive through her website and through other projects. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Sure. So, I was raised by my mom, who was a single Black mother. She was raised kind of like in a bourgeois Black family in Jersey City. She was the second, I think, Black woman to graduate from Skidmore. So she grew up in a, kind of intellectual middle-class family. Was expected to be a school teacher and instead she was an activist. She worked in the civil rights movement for SNCC when she was young, and she wrote speeches for Martin Luther King, and then she became an artist. So very early on, before I was born, she started working in film and started writing plays, and was married to my father, who was white. He was also a filmmaker at the time. They got divorced very early when I was a baby, really. Although I had a younger brother, but they officially divorced when I was 5 or 6. So she raised us alone, and she was really kind of a struggling artist. She got a great job when I was 5 teaching film production and theory at City College in New York. So that was kind of how she supported us. And throughout my childhood, she wrote 6 or 7 plays and 6 or 7 screenplays, and she wrote a collection of short stories that were not published in her lifetime. And she ended up making 2 movies. One is called The Cruz Brothers and Miss Malloy, and then a feature called Losing Ground, neither of which were released in her lifetime. Wow. And she got breast cancer when I was 11, and she kept it a secret from almost everyone, definitely from us, her children. Had a couple recurrences, and then died when I was 19, having let me know that she was sick only 2 weeks before she died.
Oh my gosh.
Which was really horrible. Yeah, I was a sophomore at Barnard, and I was doing a year abroad because I had a boyfriend in Vienna, and she called me home and said, I'm sick, and I came home and she was dying. And she left me instructions to become my brother's guardian. I had kind of a not great father and a not great recent stepfather, neither of whom kind of took on the challenge. And so I became my brother's guardian, and he's now an adult and very successful and happy. And it all has, kind of worked out, but it was very, very hard. And so basically when she died, I knew she was an artist, and I knew that she was really talented, and I knew that she was kind of somewhat known and admired in small Black intellectual circles, but she had never had any real success. And I put all her stuff in a trunk, and really never looked at her work for like 20 years. Basically, it was just really too painful. Like whenever she left a lot of letters and a lot of diary entries, and I had kind of gathered everything and kept it and took it with me as I moved and grew up. Alfred, my stepfather, and I were her literary executors when the estate was handled. But there was no real work to be done with her work because no one was interested. And around 20 years later, when I was in my late 30s, I divorced the father of my 4 kids and went through a very difficult divorce and a lot of depression, and decided that it was really time for me to like look at her life and kind of try and make sense of why I was such a mess, basically. And I took out this trunk and started reading her work and was really blown away by it, and really discovered I had never read these short stories. Like, I had seen this pile of stories, but I'd never read them. And the stories were really incredible and the plays were really incredible. And so I started to write this memoir that I've talked about that I'm still not finished with. And around that time, there was some interest in losing ground from a professor at Yale, and this lab where the original films were held in canisters was closing, and they wanted me to do something with these disintegrating films. And so I ended up making the decision to pay to have both films restored, digitally restored.
Wow.
Which I thought I was really just doing for my family and for like whatever remote, academic might be kind of interested. But I really thought it was just a personal, I felt like I was doing something for my dead mother. And so I had the films restored, and I found a distributor, a company called Milestone Films, that specializes in kind of resurrecting lost artwork, lost films. And they said they would, make it available on DVD. And I really thought that my work was done. This was like, 2014, I think. And then the film was invited to be in a film festival at Lincoln Center, celebrating independent Black filmmakers in New York in the late 80s. And it just blew up. The New Yorker reviewed it and called her a genius and said that had the film been released in her lifetime, it would have changed film history. And
wow.
Yeah, it was really amazing. She was the front page of the Times art section, and she just got a ton of attention. And so then the film played all over the country and in Europe for like a year. And at that point I thought, oh, well, now that Losing Ground has been so successful, I probably can get these short stories published. And I dug them out of the trunk and dusted them off and figured, did some editing and figured out a title and sent them off and sold the collection to Echo, which is part of HarperCollins. Mm-hmm. And again, really didn't have any expectations, but kind of thought this is so, I was thrilled. I was like, this is so amazing. My mother's stories will exist in this paperback book. And then those were incredibly well reviewed. The collection's called Whatever Happened to Interracial Love, and she got great, great reviews. And so then this year I published a collection of selected works. So I pulled together a couple plays and a couple screenplays and an excerpt from a novel that she never finished, and some letters and some diary entries. And that just came out in February 2019, also to phenomenal reviews in the Times and the New Yorker and all over the place. So it's really been an amazing story. She's now like really part of the Black canon. And actually, we're about to sign an option offer with for one of her really early screenplays with a super, super talented Black actress director. So it's like an amazing, amazing thing. I don't even really know what to make of it. Like, it's so hard to imagine, this is my mother, and I grew up with her in the 70s and 80s, and then she died in 1988, and now it's 2019, and her daughter lives in Brooklyn and has made her kind of famous, and like the whole thing is just weird.
It's crazy, but what an amazing gift you have given her.
Yeah, and I'm just so glad people can she really is also, it's very easy for, sometimes people think, oh my God, I did such an amazing job. The truth is the work is really extraordinary. The movie is, particularly for Black women to see Losing Ground and to read these stories, I think it must be mind-blowing, because she's very, she writes a lot about sex and like intellect. It's kind of, all her work is kind of about like arty intellectuals and romantic love and sex. And it's kind of funny and really, really smart and kind of poetic writing. And I just think at the time, it's no real surprise it wasn't released or published. It was like no one had seen.
The world wasn't ready for her yet.
That's right. And even now, like, it's just like the perfect time, really, for her to be released. So yeah, it's amazing.
That is so amazing. And so do you think that so my mom died at 39. I was 3
I'm so
also of breast cancer.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I have the BRCA gene. I don't know if you've gone through all that testing.
I have. I don't have the BRCA gene. I'm so
that's good.
sorry.
Well, I'm so glad that you don't. So, but I've had all my surgeries and I'm good. I'm better than ever.
Right.
But I know that my mother's death has a lot to do with why I do 40 Thrive, because I feel once I passed the age that my mother was when she died, I felt like I was on bonus time. I felt like, oh, this is the time I'm supposed to do great things, because she didn't get that chance. I don't know. Just my head was all spinning with opportunity. And so do you feel like your mom's death at 46 has kind of helped or hindered you when it comes to working with women over 40?
That's so interesting. It's really interesting to me to hear your perspective of it. Mine, I guess, is similar but slightly different. So I realized when I was on my book tour last year, it had not even occurred to me that I started the group when I was 46, which was the same year my mother died.
Right.
And the way I see it is I didn't suddenly feel like, oh my God, I have to do all these things. But I didn't until I was 46, even though my mother was dead, I always kind of had her in front of me. Like I had this idea of what a woman looked like at 36 and 38 and 42 and what her life might be like. And I was in some not so good ways replicating her life, I think, becoming a single mother, a lot of violence and adultery in my life and hers. I was I think I've been probably a better mom, but a slightly disconnected mom, a little bit like she was. So I could kind of see all the ways that I was like her. And suddenly at 46, I didn't have a model anymore. And it was incredibly freeing in a surprising way. I felt like, okay, I don't know what this is going to look like, but in some ways I felt liberated by it. I mean, I'm always totally burdened by sadness of her loss. So I was surprised by how that felt. But I also didn't have any models. And I think completely subconsciously, in a lot of ways, I created the group to create a huge room full of women who could be my models and tell me, and support me and kind of be my mothers. I mean, that's really what I've done. It's weird.
26,000 moms you have. That's a lot of moms. I think I just looked at 39 as the end point. Like that's when the party was over, and that's where, and so when I was 34 and found out I had the gene, and then I had a lump and I had surgeries, and I had 2 babies under 2, and it was, I felt like it was a second chance. So as much as it was hard to go through, it was an opportunity that she hadn't received.
That's amazing. Yeah. I think I did spend my 20s and 30s and into my 40s petrified all the time that I would get breast cancer. So I didn't have the experience you had, and I'm so sorry you had it, but I was always so scared that was going to happen. And there is something about, even now, my mother's breast cancer was hormone receptive and was premenopausal. And I do feel some relief now. I'm postmenopausal. I haven't had a period in a couple of years. I'm heavily surveilled for breast cancer, and I could still easily get breast cancer, as so many women do anyway, genetic or not. But I do feel some relief feeling that like I'm past that. I no longer feel obsessed, but I'm going to get premenopausal breast cancer like she did.
Right. And that you're sort of in the general public now with your risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I could talk to you all day.
Fun. We should meet maybe when I'm in LA. We'll see.
I would love to. I love what you're doing, how you present yourself and how you show up in your group and how you show up in the world. Like, I think that you only teach the rest of us that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be open. What's the worst that could happen? Like, there are going to be people in there, and I've seen it in your group, that are like, that's not my experience. I don't know what you're talking about. And I sometimes get that. Although I have a couple of people under 40 in my group, and I feel like they're usually the ones who are like, I don't think that's right. I'm like, well, look at the rest of the women who are in their 50s and 60s who are totally,
right,
confirming what I'm saying.
Yeah. Sometimes it's funny, actually, when you get like a woman in their 40s will say something, and then of course women in their 50s will have a completely different take on it. And I love those moments. Those, like, it's again, just kind of learning moments. But
well, yeah. And just like you said, the moms, like, I feel like the women in my group that are in their 50s and 60s are like, the ghost of Christmas future. We get to really learn from them.
Totally. 100%.
So before we go, though, I do ask all of my guests, what do you think it means to 40 Thrive?
I think it means to kind of have more courage, probably, and to, really be able to look at how much wisdom you've acquired, and I don't know, set goals for doing more as we get older. I don't know. I feel because my kids are grown now and out of the house for the most part, and I'm 49, it is like a whole new world, right? I mean, I've spent 25 years raising kids. And so I do think it's about building on your wisdom. I think that's probably what 40 Thrive is.
I love that, building on your wisdom. Well, Nina Lorez Collins, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. This was super fun. We'll stay in touch online.
Thank you so much for listening. Join us in our free private 40 Thrive Facebook group. The link to that is in the show notes. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. You will never have to search for another episode. It will just magically appear in your favorite podcast app. And don't be afraid to share it with a friend. You know the one, she could use a little inspiration. Take care and keep thriving. Spring has sprung, and with the change of seasons, sometimes comes an increase in vitality. If you're feeling in the mood for a little more personal time, may I suggest Coconu. Coconu is all about providing clean and natural ingredients when you're enjoying your most intimate moments, with or without a partner. Naturally safe products developed by people who are obsessed with quality. Get 15% off with promo code GROWNASS at grownasswoman.guide/Coconu. That's 15% off with promo code GROWNASS at grownasswoman.guide/Coconu.